This is Mark Mullinax, and I welcome you back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 23, Trust Falls.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
It's not the honors and the prizes and the fancy outsides of life which ultimately nourish our souls. It's the knowing that we can be trusted, that we never have to fear the truth, that the bedrock of our very being is good stuff. There is a close relationship between truth and trust. Fred Rogers.
Thank you for joining our class today. If you find you are returning to this class, would you kindly inform those people you know who might enjoy this podcast? And if you were to leave an honest review on your podcast provider's site, more people may find this course as well. Thank you. Today's reader and question asker is Susan Carleton, who works at Mars Hill University as a public services supervisor. She and I discuss a question together near the end of this episode. The word trust has come up often of late in our sessions. Today's podcast is dedicated to how verse 23 understands, undertakes, and underwrites trust. And here's the verse. 23. Building trust. Notice nature's spare ways. Fierce squalls do not last the morning. Cloudbursts do not last the day. How do such things come to be? This is nature at work. So if nature does not force things to last, how much less so for human affairs? So in conforming to Tao in one's daily activities, what happens is this, that in adjusting, one identifies with Tao. In conforming to the virtue power in daily life, what happens is that, in this alignment, you and virtue power are one. Identify with Tao to trust Tao's embrace. Identify with virtue power to embrace its straightforward character. Identify with renunciation to learn how even losses are welcome joys. Without living into these trusts, how can one live as trustworthy? Let's go through this verse systematically. In the first few lines, we see nature's actions on display. Fierce squalls, cloudbursts. I guess one could also add earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. Yet does not all nature have this rhythm of rising presence and then a fading into silence? Think sunshine, a season like summer, a cooling breeze. The truth is the same. Nature does not force anything to last. There is a naturalness and spontaneousness. That word we saw back in verse 17, ziran, is here, the third and fourth characters in this verse. Nature has this spontaneously natural, unprompted, and unpremeditated process to play out. To our minds, these processes can seem dangerous, but the greater truth here is that nature does not force. Nature does not force things to last. Things are not, then they are not again. Seasons of nature, seasons in our lives. Natural, ziran, spontaneous, these seasons do not last. In fact, most of our time under and within nature is not violent or exciting. Things just appear and disappear, usually without our acknowledgement, and nature hums along like it always has. Next, the Chinese word tung starts to shape the meaning of this verse, and I mean radically. The Chinese character here to notice is tung, used in this verse 6 times. Etymologically, tung contains the pictograph of a cover or a box with a lid, with a mouth or opening. This mouth aligns with the box, yielding the senses of two things that fit together naturally. Its various meanings include is one with, becomes one, resembles, aligns, I like that one, and identifies. These are our spiritual practices. If I read this verse correctly, I mean long-term spiritual practices, never one-off activities or one-and-done events every now and then. For in building alignment with Tao and Day, a long-term relationship is assumed, one built ever on the byproduct of this singly long life calling and vocation, or trust. A lifetime of self-trust means that come success or failure, one is never lacking, but always complete. Functionally, here's how tung figures into the heart of this verse. I repeat the relevant parts of this verse and add the sound tung right after the Chinese word appears to show you how this verse works from the inside out. So, in conforming tung to Tao in one's daily activities, what happens is that in adjusting tung, one identifies tung with Tao. In conforming tung to the virtue power in daily life, what happens is that in this alignment tung, you and virtue power are one. Identify tung with Tao to trust Tao's embrace. Identify tung with virtue power to embrace its straightforward character. Identify tung with renunciation to learn how even losses are welcomed joys. I wanted to show just now Lao Tzu's intent here. Tung, repeated for emphasis, demonstrates his desire to emphasize, by repetition, a powerful but perhaps not obvious truth, and that is our truths are certified by our trusts. Our trusts are practices. These practices are tung, conforming to, adjusting to, identifying with, and aligning within. Lao Tzu, repeating the same word 6 times over a span of 31 words in this verse, forms the essence of his teaching here. I would phrase it like this: we are built for trust, alignment, and conforming. Of course, we can put our trust in the wrong things like money or people like, well, you know who. However, trust is our soul's reaching out to something trustworthy and handshaking with it. This reaching out and this handshaking with are nothing less than the practices of Tao identification and alignment with Tao in the now, the here, and the this. Many of our pod's episodes have highlighted one Tao truth again and again, and here it is again, and this time with feeling. The Tao that is the universe is the same Tao that is you. Same processes, same Jiran spontaneity, same yinning and yanging, except we can forget or neglect this. The good news is that this verse outlines how, in the Chinese verb tung, you can get your groove back. Reconnect with your original nature that has not absconded with its goods and power. The power for the peaceful is resident within, always was, always will be, even right now, right here.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
This power for peace, this ziran, this spontaneous conforming, aligning, and identifying with, are the spiritual practices we use to learn who we are. By doing them, like a musician with his daily scales and practice, or like an athlete with her daily regimen of practice. By practicing, conforming, and identifying with Tao, we tap into and remember. That is, we align with our original power for peace. Practicing this power, we align with and conform with what is already. There is nothing one has to relearn. You just remember. For here's what happens in a musician's or athlete's practice. We act on the outside, scales, harmonics, chords, running, lifting, skills isolation, and then this outside practice becomes more of our identity. We are not ashamed to be seen in public doing our musical or athletic practices and performances. Why? Because you realize in your practices that you are that musician, that athlete is you. It's your identity. But identity is not the best word. I like the word align. You align with what you already are. The sheer volume of your outward practices percolate down, get under the skin, into the muscle and its memory, and seeps into the bones, deep down into the very marrow of one's being. These practices push us to rejoin what is already true, already there. And when you join that truth, that Tao, or whatever you want to call it, you realize this is who I already am. This is who I really am. And folks, that's how trust happens. Outer meets inner, and handshake. But not as new friends. This is a reunion of ancient parts of one body, rejoining as one. A reunion, like they're supposed to be.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
One cool thing about these spiritual practices to rejoin what has been separated is that these practices are also the applications of trust. Trust upon trust, that's the way. Can you rest or trust in the truth that Tao is meant for you and that you come out of Tao like the leaf emerges from a tree? The practice of Tung is the beginning of trust and being trustworthy.
If you're at home with nothingness and simply trust what comes about, you'll find that all is in its place without a question or a doubt. Jim Clatfelter's translation of the last lines of verse 23, Tao Te Ching.
Now, the other Chinese character I want to highlight is the word we know as faith or trust or even credible. It's the word Xin. In Chinese, Xin has a very cool etymology. On the left side of the character is a person. The right side portrays the idea of word. So essentially, Xin is a person's word, which is really all one has. A person's word is their reputation, which can take, of course, decades to build, but minutes to evaporate in a forgetful moment of mistrust. This idea of faith is used in the very last line. See it as a concluding flourish, that trust is the foundation for faith. The path of faith, or rather the Tao of faith, is to practice Tung, is one with, becomes one, resembles, aligns, identifies. You practice Tung with Tao, you match up Tung with Tao. These spiritual practices of trust can include trust in a person, trust in a God, trust in a nation, trust in an organization, but most of all, trust in oneself. Like our relationship with others and self, trust is a process, a practice. It does not come overnight, but through repeated encounters. O musician, O athlete, for this is how trust begins, and then is shown to work, and then is held as a constant force or energy. And in this process of trusting, one aligns, identifies with, conforms to what one already is.
Trust yourself. You know more than you think you do. Benjamin Spock. Trust is the highest form of human motivation. It brings out the very best in people. Stephen R. Covey. Trust starts with truth and ends with truth. Santosh Kalwar. Trust is the highest form of human learning. Paulo Coelho. Trust is like a paper. Once it's crumpled, it can't be perfect again. Unknown.
So what is it that one trusts, huh? Trust in the very essence of yourself. Practice handshaking with your core, which is Tao. Have the confidence that when one is aware of one's essence as Tao, there is no fear, just confidence. We just don't travel the way or road called Tao. We are of Tao itself. We too are the way. And until this handshaking happens, trust ain't real. Until this handshaking of flesh and soul, muscle and marrow, sweat and soul, there is no reconnection with Tao. You know this. So, this entire verse is about trust. Trust yourself, then you'll know how to live, said Goethe. For
it is obvious when a person does not trust himself. He hardly inspires others' trust. Verse 17, Tao Te Ching.
Verse 22 concludes likewise. Without living into these trusts, how can one live as trustworthy? Have we ever been able to trust and control at the same time?
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Practicing trust in this tung, or alignment, wisdom starts to come in more naturally, more automatically. Over time, like a seasoned athlete or musician, we become more and more mindful, more and more deeply who we already are. In this handshaking of our inner self and our outer practices of trust, wisdom happens, and we start working more and more as a team. Our class concludes today with 7 pragmatic practices of this trust that reveal more of our pre-existing connections with Tao. I call them trust falls, leaning into the mysteries and paradoxes so far that one falls into them. But in doing so, we learn that we are not broken, but made more whole. Number 1, trust in Tao itself. There is no place or time without Tao. We join Tao already in progress and begin to trust that in letting go of our own desires, Tao emerges from being submerged in us to become our guide for actions and thoughts. Its inborn wisdom of the universe is also born in us and born by us. To trust Tao is to trust the natural, Zhiran, spontaneous processes of the universe. What we lose are unreal expectations that somehow the world has to revolve around me, or that my control freaking actually works or gets me somewhere. 2, trust in simplicity. In leading a simple life, one harvests contentment and inner peace. No need to chase achievements or possessions. It is possible to live unattached to material things, to unnatural or toxic relationships. We can live unhinged from ego's wild swings. 3, trust in non-action, or wu wei. This can be hard to trust in letting go, but reflect for a moment. Have you ever been able to trust and control simultaneously, or interfere and non-interfere at the same time? Kind of like walking and sprinting at the same time. Trusting in wu wei, our actions become part of a larger flow, or Tao. And Tao's Zhiran, or effortless spontaneity, becomes our second nature. Well, actually, it's our first nature. Number 4, trust in the unknown. Taoism does not gloss over the vast mysteries of the universe, but Tao teaches us that our embrace of the unknown can be projects and practices of open trust. We do not have to see the ends of all things to begin a marriage, right? Or to start a career, or have children. We don't have to see the ends to begin these things. So rather than fearing what can happen, Tao Te Ching urges us to view the unknown as our opportunities for growth and learning. Trusting the unknown develops our adaptability, our senses of wonder, leading to inside out and outside in understandings of self and cosmos, and how both handshake and always have. 5. Trust in interconnectedness. This trust practice sees all things as parts of oneself, that to injure one part of the whole is to diminish oneself, even yellow jackets, even mosquitoes. 6. Trust in detachment. This can be hard, to trust in the practice of not attaching to our usual things and bling or relationships. Attaching, the Buddha taught, is the beginning of unmanaged desire, the mother and father of preventable suffering. Imagine that life can be lived without anxiety, without all this self-referencing achievement and ego-driven action. Anyone getting just plumb tired of living by ego's compass? 7. Trust in embracing paradox. We live in a single universe where everything has its unifying complements. A lot of folks see only a dualistic, highly contested world of good and evil, right and wrong, higher than and lower than. Instead of participating in that rat race of being first, or else one's nothing, we can move beyond artificial binary divisions and embrace a deeper understanding of reality, where apparent paradoxes work themselves out over time, Giron-like, in peace. So these 7 are our trust falls. Trust is cultivated by, fertilized with, and grounded in truth. The very practices of the truths that ever call out to and ever irrigate our forgetful lives. We cannot be trusting and control freaking at the same time. So, my dear friends and students, what path will you take? And now to Susan's question.
When my son was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with autism, as if it's not hard enough being 2. He now had so many challenges, and that would lead to outbursts and tantrums and full-on meltdowns where he would harm himself, pulling his hair or biting himself, banging his head. And as a young mother, that was hard to watch. I would do anything to comfort him. So I tried everything a mother should try, or I thought that a mother should try, or that I felt I wanted to do, and that was touch, gentle words, trying to distract with a snack or a toy. And this one day, nothing worked at all, until I was just so shattered by the effort and the distress of his distress that I was lying on the floor beside him, crying with him. And it was in that moment that he began to settle and he began to quiet when I was quiet. And he fell asleep on me finally. And so I was pinned there with nothing to do but reflect on what had gone wrong. And the words of the Tao Te Ching came back to me. The image of the bowl or cup, for instance, whose real purpose is the emptiness it provides, not the shape. And also the image of the muddy water that can't clear itself until you just leave it alone. And that was a huge lesson for me. But where I became frustrated with myself, just as he had been frustrated with himself, was that after years of reading the Tao and knowing this wisdom and being inspired by these images, in the moment where I most needed it, it wasn't there front and center for me to draw from. I had to get through this crisis and lie shattered on the floor before I saw that it held the answers for me. That, like Dorothy, I was wearing those ruby shoes all along. And so my question is, how do I do better? Well, what are the ways where I can walk that walk more effectively? Keep it front of mind. Do I need to wear a string on my finger? Do I need to get better at meditation, or what? Or is that just the way I learn?
Fantastic question. So many thank yous for this. I'm wondering if just talking about your son in this way and connecting your experience with your son with Tao Te Ching and this verse 22, where even thunderstorms can't last the whole morning. Do you think that you may have begun or you've deepened a practice of trust, that you don't really need to do anything? Hashtag Wu Wei.
I love that. I love that because in that moment, I wasn't trusting myself to simply be his mom. He didn't need me to do mom things.
Yeah.
He needed me to simply be there, be his mom. I could have trusted that I was enough in that moment for him without having to reach farther and try to do the things society would say, do this.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you're right on top of something I think that Tao does teach, is that we don't have to do something. We have to instead maybe be something. Mm-hmm. And in this verse, there's these trust practices of learning to trust Tao, that the more you practice them, the more they seep down below the skin and into the marrow and into the muscles and becomes kind of muscle memory. And maybe, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that when you come across similar instances, you'll say, oh, I've been here before. This is a buoy, a marker of how one doesn't have to just go through life willy-nilly with, angry or upset or wondering what's going on. All we have to do, I think, sometimes is just rest. Be. Experience it. And, as you so well put, what is my son actually feeling? You open the way by clearing the path. You open the way to compassion. And how can compassion operate if we're so full of ourselves? What do you think?
I like that. I don't remember where exactly in the Tao it is. It does somewhere invite us to see ourselves through others' eyes.
Yeah.
And as someone who works in public service, very often when someone comes upset, one of the things I do in public service is train people to do the job. And one of the first things I tell them is, when someone comes to you upset, it's easy to escalate that with you're upset.
Yeah.
But what you can do is be that soft space, that safe space for them, and together you see the solution as the source of the upset. Together you work on the solution. Yeah. So, being that kind of soft space, that empty vessel sometimes for them to pour into, is so much more effective than thinking you need to do something.
And this is for the males in the listening audience. We males are socialized and primed to fix, to do, to think about this solution versus that solution versus this other solution, which one would be best. And we get so engaged so that we don't see the compassion that we can do in the moment, or the emptiness that may be the very best thing that we can do. So I think you've named a strategy that we males need to understand and practice more.
Interesting.
What do you think?
I like that. Yeah, I can do it myself, even not being male. So, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. This has been an honor and a pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching text and Taoist practices are good news for today. Tao still speaks. Susan Carleton, thank you, spoke and questioned. Audrey Davis drew. Molly Hartwell sang. Fortress Press holds the copyright for any use of my Tao Te Ching translation. And without you, where would we be? So thank you for your attendance in this class on Taoism. May your days begin in peace, become wombs for radical hope, and rest in the power and practices of trust.
Are you listening?